Holy Virgin Mary. Chris Ofili's Holy Virgin Mary was a painting so offensive that it sparked nationwide protests, nearly got an entire museum shut down, and somehow still sold for $4.6 million. Here's what made this painting so controversial. It's a beautiful portrait of the Virgin Mary, but the artist used actual elephant dung to create the decorative patterns around her sacred image. The painting first appeared at the Brooklyn Museum in 1999, and within hours, Mayor Rudy Giuliani went absolutely nuclear. He threatened to cut all city funding to the museum, calling the artwork sick and disgusting. But here's the insane part. The artist, Chris Ofili, wasn't trying to offend anyone. In many African cultures, elephant dung is considered sacred and pure, used in traditional ceremonies. Ofili was actually trying to honor the Virgin Mary by blending his African heritage with Christian imagery. The controversy exploded into national headlines, and death threats poured in from across the country. Then, something incredible happened. The more people protested, the more valuable the painting became. By 2015, Christie's London, one of the world's most prestigious auction houses, auctioned this same controversial painting in a very intense bidding war. When the hammer came down, Holy Virgin Mary sold for £2.9 million. That's $4.6 million. My bed. In 1998, British artist Tracy Emin hit rock bottom. Her boyfriend had just dumped her, and she responded by locking herself in her bedroom for 4 straight days, drinking vodka, chain-smoking, and refusing to leave her bed for any reason whatsoever. When she finally stumbled out of her room, Emin stared at the absolute disaster she'd created. Stained sheets and underwear, empty bottles, cigarette butts, and used condoms were scattered everywhere like evidence of a complete psychological breakdown. Most people would have cleaned up and pretended it never happened. But Emin had a different idea. She was going to move this exact mess into one of London's most prestigious art galleries and call a masterpiece. The art world went ballistic as a result of this action. When My Bed was nominated for the Turner Prize, Parliament members stood up and gave actual speeches about how this represented the collapse of British civilization. Newspaper editors wrote furious editorials about taxpayer money being wasted on literal garbage. And the public was so outraged that protesters showed up at the gallery. 2 performance artists even snuck inside and staged a pillow fight directly on the bed, claiming they were improving the artwork. 16 years later, Christie's put My Bed up for auction. The bidding war was intense, with wealthy collectors competing for the chance to own what was essentially someone else's rock-bottom moment. The final price? Over $4.4 million for an unmade bed. Comedian. Maurizio Cattelan's Comedian is a banana duct taped to a wall that became so viral it broke the internet and caused actual fistfights at art galleries. The moment this art went on display for $120,000, crowds of people started forming massive lines just to take selfies with it. The chaos got so intense that security guards had to rope off the area like it was the Mona Lisa. But here's where things got absolutely insane. A performance artist named David DeTuno walked up to the wall, peeled the banana off, and ate it right there in front of everyone while filming himself. He called his stunt "Hungry Artist" and posted the video online, where it immediately went viral. The gallery had to replace the banana and beef up security to protect a piece of fruit. The eating incident sparked copycat chaos worldwide. People started taping bananas to walls everywhere, in their homes, offices, even McDonald's restaurants. The meme became so massive that every major news network had to cover the story of why millions of people were suddenly obsessed with fruit taped to walls. But here's the most ridiculous part. In 2024, one of the 3 original editions went back to auction. The bidding war was so intense that the final owner paid $6.2 million for the art, which is basically permission to tape grocery store fruit to their wall. Fountain. In 1917, a French artist named Marcel Duchamp walked into a New York plumbing store, bought a regular urinal, put his signature on it, and submitted it to an art exhibition just to see if he could break the entire art world. The exhibition organizers had promised they would accept any artwork from anyone who paid the $6 entry fee. Duchamp wanted to test that claim, so he chose the most offensive object he could think of and dared them to display it. The Art Society completely panicked. Here was a piece of bathroom equipment sitting in their fancy gallery next to real paintings and sculptures. They held an emergency meeting and voted to reject the urinal, even though they had promised to accept everything. Duchamp immediately resigned from the organization in protest, exposing them as total hypocrites. The scandal exploded across New York's art scene. Critics were furious, calling it a practical joke that had gone too far. But other artists rallied behind Duchamp, arguing that if an artist says something is art, then it's art, regardless of what it actually is. The original urinal disappeared shortly after the exhibition, but in 1999, one of the replica urinals that Duchamp authorized in the 1960s was auctioned. In a surprising turn of events, someone paid $1.76 million for the right to own a signed toilet. Ornament 6. Barnett Newman spent his entire career painting single vertical lines on colored backgrounds, convinced he was creating profound spiritual experiences. Newman called these vertical lines zips and believed they represented the moment of creation itself, like God separating light from darkness. To most people looking at his paintings, they just saw a stripe down the middle of a canvas that looked like something a house painter would create by accident. But Newman was deadly serious about his work. He wrote manifestos about how his paintings created feelings of the sublime and connected viewers to the infinite cosmos. He genuinely believed that staring at a single line could trigger life-changing spiritual revelations. The art world was split between people who thought Newman was a genius and others who thought he was running the greatest scam in history. Critics would stand in galleries arguing for hours about whether a single brushstroke could really represent the birth of the universe. Newman painted dozens of these zip paintings throughout his career and gave them mystical titles like One Covenant and Who's Afraid of Red, Yellow, and Blue, to make them sound more important than they actually were. Then in 2013, Sotheby's put One 6 up for auction. This particular painting featured a single white line on a blue background, basically the artistic equivalent of a Windows 95 screensaver. But the final owner didn't mind the lack of effort and bought the art for $43.8 million anyways. For the love of God, what happens when you take a human skull, cover it with over 8,000 diamonds, and claim it's worth more than some small country's entire GDP? You get Damien Hirst's most controversial creation. Hirst found an 18th century skull in a London taxidermy shop and had a wild idea. He was going to transform this piece of human remains into the most expensive artwork ever created. The project took 2 years and cost him $14 million just in materials. Every surface of the skull was meticulously covered with 8,601 flawless diamonds. The centerpiece was a massive 52.4-carat pink diamond worth $4 million placed directly in the forehead. Hirst called it For the Love of God and announced it was for sale at £50 million, about $100 million. The skull went on a world tour like a rock star, with people paying admission fees just to stare at diamond-covered human remains. Then, towards the end of the tour, Hearst Gallery made a shocking announcement. An anonymous consortium had bought the skull for the full asking price. The art world exploded. Someone had just made the most expensive art purchase in contemporary history. But years later, the truth came out in interviews. Hearst revealed he was actually part of the consortium that bought his own artwork. He had essentially sold the skull to himself while keeping partial ownership, making the entire record-breaking sale a lie. Love is in the bin. Banksy pulled off the greatest art prank in history when his painting self-destructed the moment it sold for $1.4 million, then somehow became worth 18 times more because it was broken. On October 5, 2018, an auction house was holding their evening contemporary art auction in London. The final lot was Banksy's Girl with Balloon, one of his most famous images showing a little girl reaching for a heart-shaped red balloon. The bidding was intense, and the final bidder bought the painting for just over £1 million. But the moment the auctioneer said sold, a hidden alarm started blaring throughout the auction house. The bottom of the ornate frame suddenly opened up, and the painting began sliding through what turned out to be a built-in paper shredder. The entire room watched in shock as the artwork destroyed itself right before their eyes. The audience erupted in chaos. Some people were laughing, others looked horrified, and the Sotheby's staff had no idea what was happening. The shredder jammed halfway through, leaving the top half of the painting intact and the bottom half hanging in strips like confetti. Banksy immediately took credit for the stunt on Instagram, revealing that he had secretly built the shredder into the frame years earlier, in case the painting ever went to auction. He posted a video showing how he constructed the device and said the whole thing was his commentary on the commercialization of art. But here's the absolutely insane part. Instead of making the painting worthless, the destruction made it infinitely more valuable. The auction house declared it the first artwork in history to have been created live during an auction, and Banksy gave it a new name: Love is in the Bin. After the whole event, the buyer, a European woman, decided to complete the purchase anyway. She had just bought the most famous art prank of the 21st century. 3 years later, she put Love is in the Bin back up for auction at the exact same Sotheby's sales room where it had destroyed itself. The estimate was £4 to £6 million, but the bidding war was incredible. When the hammer came down, the half-shredded painting had sold for £18.6 million. That's $25.4 million.